Good day, everybody. This is Blue Knight 7 with the Blue Knight Cast. And after my prior episode where I pretty much vented everything I'm going to vent at Nintendo for now, I did want to, just because I haven't really got to do this, do an episode where I try to talk about all the positives that did come out of all the Switch 2 news that came out. Because for all the complaints, I'll admit it, I'm probably going to be one of the people who actually buy it. Will make decisions, let's say, about what games I buy, how I'm going to vote with my wallet on some things. Like, I still haven't fully decided what I would want. And also, to be honest, I'm probably not going to be in the pre-order line for Switch 2 as much as I've talked about it. Because just my personal circumstances, I figure I'll have some money for it about the time it launches, and then everything's tied up in pre-orders and everything's sold out, and then you just can't get one. Let's be honest. And I figure I'll be one of those people in the late part of 2025 actually trying to secure one. But it is what it is. I'm not letting it shake me up. And I don't care to say, out of the games that are launching with the Switch 2 and that we know about, I kind of know which games I want. Like, ideally, I would get the Switch bundle with Mario Kart World. I don't want to pay $80 for Mario Kart, sorry. Nothing against Mario Kart, it's just not my number one Nintendo series. Like, I usually buy the generation of Mario Kart for the console. But I don't play Mario Kart non-stop like some people might do. So for me, I'm paying $80 for something that might only get not as much play time as, say, Xenoblade or just about anything else. I'll play it, I'll enjoy it, I'll explore that open world. I may say it's the best Mario Kart ever. I just don't want to spend $80 on it. I'm also considering the fact that it wouldn't shock me if there's some kind of expansion later you download. So even if you buy the physical, you're going to be downloading something. I've kind of started to think some games you might as well just download, and that's probably Mario Kart World. And, you know, this could be a generation where if they hold to the $80 right now, I get that $80 is inflation, but wages need some time to catch up. So I may be waiting for eShop sales or whatever I can do to get some of these games. I may just go digital with this console. We'll see. I haven't fully decided how I want to approach it. I've always been a physical person. I really have. I'd rather have the game key cards than what they've done in the past. But I don't know. We'll see. That's something I'll be evolving my beliefs on as we go here. But I definitely want to try to get the launch deal with Mario Kart World with it. I'm not doing Switch Tour, Welcome Tour. Looks interesting. I'm just not paying $10 for it. I do want Street Fighter 6. I enjoy it on Steam on my PC. I'd like it on a portable. I am going to be one of those getting Street Fighter 6, whether it's a key card or not. Also, I do want Cyberpunk 2077, and that is probably one game I will get as a physical, because here's the thing. When you buy these, to me, the advantage of buying these physicals, especially on Switch, is the memory's limited. And when you buy Cyberpunk 2077, it's $70. but the physical is a 64 gigabyte card that holds the game, and that's 64 gigabytes that doesn't go on your Switch system. I guess you could back it up as a virtual card if you just wanted to. But my point is, that's memory you didn't have to pay for. If you download it from the eShop for $69.99, that's memory that it will take up in your system. If you buy the physical, that's a little less memory. That's memory freed up in your system. That's why I like physicals. That's why I wish Nintendo had figured out a way to reduce the cost of those things and make 128 gigabyte cartridges or something. But I guess you can't have it all, right? But that's the problem with Switch 2. It's just hard to not get mired up in that stuff. But that being said, I want Mario Kart World. I want Street Fighter 6. I want Cyberpunk 2077. I do want to get Bravely Default Flying Fairy. I generally support the Square Enix games, buy them, play them. So, yes, that's 4 pretty good titles off the bat. Donkey Kong Bonanza. I'm a sucker for Donkey Kong. Yes, I'll get that in July. Or I'll get it whenever I get a Switch 2. On the smaller projects, definitely want Fast Racing Fusion. By the way, if you have a Switch, get Fast RMX. It's good. It's an indie F-Zero, and it delivers on core gameplay. Fast Fusion, to me, is just a buy. I don't even need a review. I just know it's going to be good just from the prequels, so I'm going to buy. And that's kind of how I see the immediate landscape on Switch 2. Will I upgrade my Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom? Yeah. I'll probably just keep my old one and use NSO for now to get free updates and see what happens with others as they come out. And whenever Metroid Prime 4 comes out, I'm just getting the Switch 2 edition. To me, I want the Switch 2 game at this point. So, and I'll upgrade my Mario Party Jamboree however I need to too, because that's the one thing Mrs. Blue Knight will play with me. But maybe she'll play Mario Kart World. We'll see. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I see that landscape. Controllers. I'm tempted to just go ahead and get a second set of Joy-Con, Switch 2 Joy-Con, if only for some people in the family that would want to play, like Mario Kart World or Mario Party. And Street Fighter. So, I don't know. I'll think about that. That's $90. I mean, I'll think about that one. Not in a hurry for Pro Controller, to be honest, because I've become quite adapted to my SN30 Pro from 8BitDo. Excellent controller, by the way. Excellent company. And all you're missing is chat functionality, and I think I'll live. That's sort of my reaction to the whole chat thing. I think I'll live. And yeah, that's kind of how I see that, and a lot of this is probably going to come much later in the year for me than June 5th, unfortunately. And I just hope the dang tariffs don't rear their face in between. That's life in 2025, people. But that being said, I want to, on this episode, focus a little more on the positive sides. And obviously there's games I want for it, but I want to talk a minute about the console itself. As I've said in the last few episodes, it's clearly a different direction and for Nintendo in that they didn't reinvent the wheel. Though they added features, I wouldn't say they built the system around a gimmick. They kept the central gimmick this time of being a hybrid console, I would argue. And instead of added functionality to it, especially as both portable and docked. And worried more about just the simple experience, like core experience, I would say. Better screen for portable, bigger screen for portable, 4K support for docked mode, variable refresh rates, 120 hertz screen, HDR support. Basically, they wanted this to work better as a portable, a higher fidelity portable, and they wanted something that your expensive TV can get something out of. That's kind of what I get out of the whole thing. Like if you're docking this, you should consider whether or not your TV is an HDR TV at this point, because you'll get a little more out of it. And I know there's TV aficionados. I'm not really one of them. I'm using a 1440p gaming monitor though with HDR and all that, so I know I'm covered. But some people might have to consider the TV they're using if they want to get the most out of this Switch 2. But generally speaking, I'd make sure you have a 120 hertz TV with HDR and 4K if you're buying one. Though most on the market are 4K as it is these days. But also noteworthy, because I could tell there were people actually thinking about this stuff this time. In the settings, you can indicate the output of your screen, 1080p, 1440p, 4K, which I thought that is great, because my Switch is primarily connected, like I said, to my gaming monitor, which is part of my PC setup, which is 1440p, so yeah, I'll just set it to that. But I think the most important thing, specs aside, is when you look at the games that have been on display and attempts to compare them to other things. We're not far along yet to have a true apple-to-apple comparison on anything. And because Switch is just a different architecture from everything else out there, it's hard to compare it to anything. It's always going to be an apple to orange. But the reason I'm going there is just to reference a couple of articles here, both courtesy and Nintendo Life. If you can tell, I get a lot of news from there. But this is Alex Oni doing his own little feature about how powerful it is for $450, which no one really makes a big issue about that pricing for the unit itself. So there's that. But the only main reason I bring this video up, I encourage you to watch this video if you want more details. But I'm trying to bring up this screenshot. Here we go. This is Cyberpunk 2077 in what I'll call an early scene of the game. Most people who, and I don't consider this a spoiler, but if you start a new game and pick the Nomad life path, you're going to be here where it's depicted. And on the left is Steam Deck, and on the right is Switch 2. They look, you see, to me, Switch 2 is better. Now, they're very close. Granted, they're very close, but to me, for just resolution, sharpness here, Switch 2 is actually outdoing a Steam Deck. Color, and this is sort of a theme, and I'll show you something else here in a minute, but to me, just sort of a theme is that I think the Switch 2 just does a lot with its HDR, and it's putting out crisper images than you think it should. And the color, I think, is generally better or arguably better than things it's been compared to. But you can see here, this one just looks a little blurrier, Steam Deck, to me. More washed out color in the sky. Switch 2 gives you crisper sky blue, I would argue. Lighting there's differences. I think Switch 2 gives you a little more contrasty lighting. But overall, I just feel like Switch 2 hits better than Steam Deck does. Now, it's not true apples to apples again. Steam Deck is running on a AMD x86 architecture system on a chip, and Switch 2 is using ARM processors, mobile technology basically, with a NVIDIA custom GPU that has 3000, like RTX 3000 series architecture, and it does have access to DLSS. But important to note, I don't think any of these third parties have shown any DLSS footage. Like, I think all this has been native. I believe, and also believe it's 1080p that we're seeing here for Cyberpunk. Probably 720p to match the Steam Deck screen, actually. Sorry. And yeah. Actually, take that back. Switch to it. Portable is 1080, so yeah, that's 1080p. So yeah, pretty solid overall. Actually, wait, I messed up, I think, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry about that. I think the current build of Cyberpunk for Switch 2 is 720p portable and 1080p docked. And they have not shown DLSS yet on it. So it will probably be 1080p portable before it's over. And it'll probably stay around 30 FPS and maybe 40 for a performance mode. Probably keep it at 720 at that point. But, that's something that'll be tinkered on and worked on. But my point is, we have this comparison shot from Alex Oni at Nintendo Life showing Steam Deck, Switch 2. I just think Switch 2 looks better. No offense to Steam Deck people. Just no offense at all. And probably for better reporting on this, Digital Foundry did a deep dive into what they could tell from analysis of the specs, and there's some comparisons up here, but I'll read this for the audience here. Now that we're getting super close to the Switch 2 launch, and with a ton of specs and technical details to get stuck into, the boffins over Digital Foundry, yeah, Nintendo Life is British, have been cutting through all the hyperbole to take a detailed look at what we actually know about the Switch 2's custom NVIDIA T239 processor. We've devoured every scrap of the currently available Switch 2 gameplay footage, but by tracking back over some historical leaks, starting all the way back with a tweet which showed the T239 in 2021, Digital Foundry has put together an impressively detailed picture of what we can actually expect from the new console when it arrives. So how much horsepower does the Switch 2 have, and how does this power help line it up against the likes of the PlayStation 4 or Valve Steam Deck? Over on Eurogamer, Digital Foundry's Richard Ledbetter gets into the gory details. Quote, "We know from our own sources that T239 may share the same GPU architecture as T234, the Ampere architecture used by NVIDIA for its RTX 30 series graphics cards. But everything else is all new. The deep learning accelerator and the ARM Cortex A78AE are gone, and while the 2048 CUDA Core GPU is slimmed down to 1536 cores. Meanwhile, a 256-bit memory interface drops down to 128-bit. In the process, the gigantic 455 millimeter squared T234 processor drops down to around 200 millimeter squared, much larger than Steam Deck's, but fabricated on a less sophisticated, less transistor dense process. So size-wise, bigger than the Steam Deck's, but it's not quite as dense within the chip. And you could say it's a slimmed down T234 in a lot of ways. Okay, Ledbetter concludes that with the specs to hand and taking the information as legitimate, he's unsurprised by the showings at last week's Direct. I have to say that there's nothing from last week's Nintendo Direct or the hands-on demos in the Paris and New York events that look at all surprising. Everything seems to slot in perfectly with expectations, barring a conspicuous lack of DLSS-supported games. When Activision's Bobby Kotick described the machine as offering PS4 class power, and by and large, that's in the ballpark of what the third-party demos revealed. But beyond performing on a similar level to PS4 overall, end quote, by the way, but beyond performing on a similar level to a PS4 overall, there are also improvements to be found with Switch 2's more modern architecture. For example, the 256 gigabyte of universal flash storage, backed by upgraded file decompression hardware. Any devs should have lightning fast access to data in a way that the PS4 didn't. Keep in mind, PS4 used mechanical hard drives still yet. Came out in 2013, mechanical hard drives, and used Blu-ray discs for memory. With this in mind, Ledbetter says, Cyberpunk 2077 will be an interesting exercise in seeing how Switch 2 handles demanding titles. But more than that, I can't wait to see Star Wars Outlaws, where the footage shown in last week's Direct looked perhaps too good to be true. End quote. The Digital Foundry article, which is chock full of more technical details, then goes on to discuss the question of whether or not the Switch 2 could be a Steam Deck killer. According to Ledbetter, this is something they're currently being asked a lot. He keeps his response short, saying that our answer for now is both yes and no. More specifically, our contention right now is that the docked Switch 2 delivers more than the deck. But the jury is out on the mobile experience. Looking at third-party games like Elden Ring and Final Fantasy VII, it's hard to believe that the deck could deliver native 1080p with the same features and performance Switch 2 is delivering. However, there's a bit of a flip side to this good news, as Ledbetter goes on to say. The Valve machine running fully unlocked has a 1.6 GPU, 1.6 gigahertz GPU, and a 2.4 gigahertz to 3.5 gigahertz CPU, and I've seen it consuming up to 28 watts of power. Meanwhile, Switch 2 has a mooted 561 megahertz GPU clock and a 1.1 gigahertz CPU, and based on a 20 watt hour battery with a minimum 2 hours battery life, it'll be sipping a maximum of 10 watts of power during play, almost 1/3 of Steam Deck's consumption. So there's very obviously a bit of a complex picture being drawn up overall, but it isn't amazing, almost surreal really, to be talking about a new Nintendo console in these terms, with some of the biggest and best AAA games in the conversation, and performing well too. There are still those questions over its power draw situation, as Digital Foundry indicated, and the actual nature of NVIDIA's DLSS utilization is still also unclear. But besides these factors, everything else is pointing to a machine that will hit the ground running, and one that's certainly capable of trading blows with PS4 and Valve's handheld behemoth. And I just wanted to scroll back up here to a couple of screenshots. This is from Digital Foundry's video. But here's the Final Fantasy VII Remake on PS4 and Switch 2. And, you know, you can argue it either way. The lighting's slightly different in both. The rendering of the lighting. But to me, it's very similar. I'm a little partial to Switch 2 again just because I think the colors pop more. PS4, the lighting, it's probably better and more realistic in a technical sense, but they're very close. I just tend to prefer the Switch 2 version. And we have this screenshot as well. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure if this is from which game this is from off the top of my head. But you can see here differences in lighting. That's what this is, differences in lighting. And yeah. And I didn't go to this screenshot because it's from a prior thing where they tried to do like a mock-up with a PC just to show how that would work for 30 frames per second, 1080p with a 2050. But I think we'll know more about specifics as we go. We're not there yet. And how powerful Switch 2 is, I think, will be a subject for debate going forward in the near future. I think the real takeaway here is that this thing really is a portable PlayStation 4 docked for what it can do. I mean, for what it can do as a portable. I'm doing all kinds of tongue slips, sorry, but as a portable, it really is a PlayStation 4, and as docked, it's not exactly clear where it lands. Keep in mind, Steam Deck isn't quite a PlayStation 4 in portable. So we have something here that I think does perform. I think if DLSS is used, it will definitely outperform the Steam Deck. There may still be some areas where a Steam Deck still does better. We'll just have to see. None of this is always like works the same every time. But I think we got a portable PlayStation 4, or in docked mode, it's clearly going to hit above that. And 4K is something it can do. So is it a PS4 Pro? I think that's the easy answer. When I look at some of these shots, and I mean they're everywhere, different sites, posts, videos. Digital Foundry probably is the most authoritative source for this stuff with their level of analysis. But I would argue there's times where what I'm perceiving is probably on a Xbox Series S level, and I don't know. See, to me, that should be a little more than what a PlayStation 4 Pro can do. So that's kind of how I see that. I think we have a system that, whether docked or undocked, kind of runs on a spectrum from PlayStation 4 to Xbox Series S is what I think we have. And you could argue that this could outdo a Series S in some situations, because I think more RAM is free up in the Switch 2 than on Series S. One game we did not see during this Direct, and maybe it's just not coming, is Baldur's Gate 3. And Baldur's Gate 3, Larian Studios had a lot of trouble getting it to run on Series S. I think it's because it wasn't enough RAM, just wasn't enough resources to run certain game modes that they had, like co-op. I don't know if Switch 2 could do it, though it seems to be running Joseph Ferris's Split Fiction pretty well. Just things to consider. It's hard to make an apples to apples because it's not. Switch 2 is very much an orange or a lemon or whatever you want to call it. The rest of these are more AMD based tech, AMD X64 or X86, sorry, based tech. So it's kind of harder to compare. Easier to compare them amongst each other, but directly to a Switch, it's just hard. Switch or Switch 2. But generally speaking, though, I think we need to be glad that Nintendo did take this direction. They did try to give us a more premium Switch. And they tried to give us a Switch that, with upgraded internals, that can actually put out games that are more in the current generation. It's hard to know what the future holds just because gaming news in general has just been so weird lately. But I wouldn't be shocked if PlayStation meant to roll out PlayStation 6 by 2026 or 27. Probably 27. And because it's been, keep in mind, those things were launched in 2020. I mean, we can talk about how early they were launched, but they were launched 5 years ago. So it wouldn't be strange to see a PlayStation 6 2 years from now. And Xbox, who knows what they're doing. They say they're making a new console. And all this tariff nonsense may slow that down. We'll see. But we're looking at this generation where maybe the consoles are better, but are they going to seem that much better with diminishing returns? I think that's going to be a problem for Xbox and PlayStation. I think the wise thing to do would be just to keep their platforms for now and make some dang games that might sell their current platforms. But Switch 2, people have wanted a Switch Pro or something since the Switch 1. They've wanted more power in the handheld since Switch 1. And I think we're finally getting them to catch up with that. And if it's running above a PlayStation 4 in some cases, and touching Xbox Series S, when you figure in diminishing returns, we're kind of at a point where it's going to uses DLSS to make games that looks on par with anything Xbox and Sony are doing. It's going to be close. There's always going to be differences. There's always going to be PlayStation 6 is better. But we should be at a point now where Nintendo is punching above its weight better and just competing more with them. I think the whole Nintendo is its own thing will start to fade away because we're paying almost as much for a Switch 2 that is running on a 4K TV. I mean, that's the reality of it. And it's notable that what was demoed didn't show DLSS, and I think a lot of that is not every developer uses DLSS. It's not something everybody knows how to do. It's proprietary tech for NVIDIA, and consoles, everything else, you have been using AMD. So CD Projekt Red understands NVIDIA, and they're handling the port themselves. I'm sure the Cyberpunk port will end up using DLSS at some point, and it'll be used to keep the frame rate smooth at 40 or 30, and just allow for a little better resolution at 40 and 30. That's probably what will happen with the game there. But generally speaking, what DLSS does is it either keeps the same resolution and ups the frame rate in the end, or if you're capping the frame rate, it'll help your resolution. So, and it usually helps power draw a little bit in the end too. So we'll see what that does. And I just believe we're going into a good generation for Nintendo for third-party games. I really do. I hope things work out. It's been rocky, but I hope the ship just moves out soon. thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. This is Blue Knight 7 with the Blue Knight Cast. And I'll try to be back next week with steadier content, and I'll try to talk more about individual games and other gaming news. We need to get away from Switch 2 for a little bit, I think. See you later.